February 2010, a medium security prison in Columbus, Ohio. A seemingly ordinary night turned into an event that left everyone in shock. In cell block C, the lifeless body of Jason Riker was discovered. At first glance, it appeared to be a typical inmate altercation: scattered belongings, bloodstains on the floor, and signs of a struggle. However, something didn't fit the expected scenario. The detectives assigned to the case quickly realized that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Delving into the details, they uncovered an unexpected clue: personal notes exchanged between Jason and a prison guard, Sarah Holloway. This discovery sent shockwaves through the prison administration. Sarah had always been a model employee, a paragon of professionalism. Yet recently, her behavior had raised some concerns. August 2009. Sarah had been working at the prison for over 4 years. Her life was a gray canvas painted with monotony: morning shifts, endless checks, and brief conversations with colleagues. Everything changed the day she noticed Jason Riker for the first time, a quiet inmate with sorrowful eyes. Their brief exchange had gradually turned into longer conversations. Jason seemed different from the others. In his gaze, Sarah saw a glimpse of humanity that was missing in her mundane routine. For Sarah, these encounters became a breath of fresh air. In Jason, she found what she had long been searching for: attention, support, and a sense of purpose. However, Jason was not the man he seemed to be to him. To him, Sarah was merely a tool, a means to escape his confinement. February 13th, 2010 night. Sarah walked the blocks, checklist in hand, but her mind was in turmoil. Her relationship with Jason had become an addiction. Her focus shifted from her duties to their brief but meaningful encounters. She was oblivious to how much her priorities had changed. That night was destined to be pivotal. Sarah had yet to realize that her trust in and affection for Jason would ignite a tragedy that would forever alter her life. Sarah Holloway, once confident in her professional abilities, was gradually losing control over her emotions. Jason Riker, with his piercing eyes and skillful words, masterfully exploited this vulnerability to his advantage. Their conversations, which initially seemed harmless, quickly turned into a dangerous game. She was his guard, but it was Sarah who found herself trapped. Inmates often find ways to pass notes, and Jason was no exception. However, his notes to Sarah were unique. In each one, he portrayed himself as a victim of injustice. "It's dangerous here," he wrote. "I'm just trying to survive, but they're after me." He convinced Sarah that he needed someone to protect him, and that she alone was capable of doing so. His words were carefully crafted to tug at her heartstrings. Sarah gradually began to see it as her personal mission. Her sympathy for Jason transformed into a conviction that she could save him. Instead of maintaining neutrality, she became a participant in this dangerous game, unaware that her own vulnerability made her an easy target for manipulation. February 13th, 9:45 p.m. While completing her routine rounds, Sarah received another note from Jason. Her heart froze as she read, "I'm in serious danger. They're planning to attack me tonight. You have to help." A flood of doubts filled her mind, but her fear for his safety outweighed them. She felt responsible for him, not realizing how deeply she was entangled. Around midnight, right on schedule, Sarah disabled the surveillance camera outside Jason's cell. She knew how to cover her tracks. Years of working in the prison had taught her the ins and outs of security. But this time, her actions weren't guided by duty. They were driven by emotion. Sarah decided to help Jason herself. 12:15 a.m., she quietly unlocked the cell door, peering into the darkness. Her heart pounded, and her hands trembled slightly. She stepped inside, trying to reassure herself that she was acting to save him. But Jason, sitting calmly in the dark corner of the cell, didn't seem scared. His gaze was cold, making Sarah doubt for a moment. Still, she believed she was doing the right thing. She had no idea that this step would mark the beginning of her personal tragedy. Her confidence in Jason was slowly dissolving, but it was already too late. Sarah was deeply ensnared in a game he expertly controlled, and this was only the start of the disaster. Sarah Holloway entered Jason Riker's cell, confident that she was fulfilling her duty to help a man who she believed was in mortal danger. She had disabled the surveillance camera, thinking it would protect both her and Jason from suspicion. Her actions were driven by fear and the deep emotional bond that had developed between them over the past months. But everything went awry. Jason no longer appeared to be a victim. His gaze was cold and calculated, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. His demeanor revealed that every move he made had been part of a meticulously crafted plan. Suddenly, Sarah realized she had been drawn into a game she could not control. Without showing any emotion, Jason declared his intention to escape. His words were resolute, and he made it clear that her assistance was essential to his plan. This wasn't a plea or a request, it was an ultimatum. Sarah faced a moral dilemma: help him and risk everything, or refuse and expose their relationship. Sarah, who had once seen Jason as someone in need of saving, now realized she had been manipulated. Her sense of trust and responsibility clashed with reality. She tried to persuade him to abandon his plan, but Jason was unwavering. His words were cold and precise, intensifying her inner conflict. The situation grew more dire as it became evident that Jason was willing to do anything to achieve his goal. Sarah felt the pressure mounting, along with the fear that her already fragile life could shatter completely. Her actions that night were the result of emotional overload and an unresolved fear of being exposed. The lack of control over the situation and her emotions pushed Sarah to the point of no return. Her trust in Jason had been a fatal mistake, and the consequences of that trust would irrevocably alter her life. This moment became a turning point in the subsequent investigation, raising questions about human frailty, manipulation, and the boundaries of moral compromise. Sarah Holloway stood in silence, staring at the scene unfolding before her. Everything that had happened in the past few minutes reminded her how easily someone could lose control. Jason Riker's cell was no longer just a place where she felt needed. It had become the epicenter of her deepest fears. Sarah knew that her actions that night would have far-reaching consequences, and her only thought was to hide anything that might reveal her involvement. Summoning all her resolve, she began to act. Her primary goal was to create a scene that would convince others that Jason had been attacked by another inmate. Sarah understood that if anyone suspected her, her life would be ruined. She acted with cold precision, though internally she was consumed by fear. Carefully erasing any trace of her presence, Sarah inspected the cell meticulously. She focused on every detail: the arrangement of objects, surfaces she might have touched. Her knowledge of investigative procedures and years of experience gave her an advantage, but the fear of making a mistake never left her. Every move was deliberate and cautious. Her greatest concern was the surveillance camera she had disabled before entering Jason's cell. She knew it would raise questions, so her next step was to reactivate the system. Sarah did this in a way that appeared routine, as if she were simply performing her regular patrol. She made sure not to show any signs of nervousness, though her heart raced faster than usual. After completing her efforts to conceal any evidence, Sarah resumed her duties. She continued her patrol, maintaining an outward calm even as a sense of doom weighed heavily on her. Each step down the prison corridors was a reminder that the consequences of that night would inevitably catch up to her. Sarah tried to convince herself that she had done the right thing, but her thoughts kept returning to what had happened. Her actions were not driven by malice or greed. They were the result of emotional pressure, fear, and despair. She sought no excuses but understood that her choices were born of deep internal conflict. That night marked a turning point in her life. Sarah realized that her attempt to hide the truth could only delay the inevitable. Her panic-driven decisions had set in motion a chain of events that could no longer be stopped. February 14, 2010. The Columbus prison awoke to a tense atmosphere. During the morning inspection, a guard discovered Jason Riker's body in his cell. The news spread quickly through the blocks, sparking murmurs among inmates and heightened vigilance among the staff. The administration immediately alerted the local authorities, and within hours, detectives Mark Talbot and Elena Grayson arrived to lead the investigation. At first, it seemed like a typical inmate conflict. Jason had a reputation as a quiet, intelligent man who kept his distance from prison gangs. However, the details of the scene, carefully examined by the detectives, raised suspicions. The knife wound had been inflicted at an unusual angle, and the signs of a struggle on the floor appeared too deliberate, as if someone had staged them. The detectives began interviewing guards and inmates, searching for any leads. Their attention quickly turned to Sarah Holloway. Colleagues noted that she had been acting strangely in recent weeks. her nervousness and frequent rounds of Block C had not gone unnoticed. Additionally, surveillance footage revealed that the camera outside Jason's cell had been disabled for 20 minutes the night before his body was found, precisely when the incident occurred. The detectives focused on this critical detail. According to the records, Sarah had been on duty in that block that night. Her behavior during the interrogation also aroused suspicion. Although she tried to remain calm, her answers were vague, and her attempts to explain the disabled camera seemed illogical. She claimed it was a technical malfunction, but a forensic examination revealed that the camera had been manually turned off. The pieces began to form a clear picture. The breakthrough came when the investigators searched Jason's cell. Among his belongings, they found a small box containing hidden notes. These notes, written in a feminine handwriting, hinted at a personal relationship between Jason and an unidentified woman. Handwriting analysis confirmed that the notes were written by Sarah. The evidence continued to mount, leaving Sarah in an increasingly vulnerable position. Her alibi didn't hold up under scrutiny, and her actions that night appeared not only deliberate but motivated by personal interest rather than professional duty. The detectives realized they were dealing with more than just a crime. They were uncovering a story of manipulation, trust, and devastating consequences. This revelation was only the first step in a larger case that promised to expose far more than anyone had anticipated. February 16, 2010. Detectives Mark Talbot and Elena Grayson pressed forward with an investigation that was rapidly gaining momentum. Their primary goal was to gather enough evidence to substantiate their suspicions about Sarah Holloway. Though she maintained a composed exterior, avoiding direct accusations, the detectives sensed there was more to her story than she let on. A thorough search of Jason Riker's cell brought new revelations. Hidden within the pages of an old book, the detectives found dozens of notes. These notes not only revealed a romantic relationship between Jason and Sarah, but also hinted at plans for an escape. Some of the notes contained prison diagrams and instructions that could be critical for organizing a breakout. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's. More evidence came from the analysis of phone records. Forensic experts revealed that Jason and Sarah had used coded language in their conversations to conceal their true intentions. Short messages that initially seemed mundane now appeared as part of a complex plan. For instance, phrases like "shift at 12" or "all clear" took on new significance when deciphered. The investigation gained further traction with a re-examination of surveillance footage. Although the camera outside Block C had been disabled at the crucial moment, other cameras captured Sarah's movements in the corridors before and after the incident. Her behavior appeared unusually nervous. Frequent pauses, glances over her shoulder, and extended stops near Jason's cell. This further solidified the detectives' suspicions. The most damning piece of evidence was a detailed escape plan found in Jason's cell. The paper outlined routes, security blind spots, and instructions on avoiding patrols. It was written in two distinct handwritings, one belonging to Jason, the other to Sarah. Handwriting analysis confirmed their collaboration. Despite her denials during interrogations, Sarah's alibi crumbled under the weight of the evidence. She claimed her notes were merely casual conversations, but their contents told a different story. Her attempts to explain her actions seemed increasingly unconvincing, and the detectives pieced together how she had become an integral part of Jason's plan. Eventually, under mounting pressure, Sarah admitted to her relationship with Jason, but insisted that her actions were driven by fear and manipulation. However, the detectives were already convinced this was only part of the truth. Now their task was to prove that her involvement was not accidental, but deliberate and calculated. The trial of Sarah Holloway, which began in October 2010, attracted significant media attention and public interest. The case, revealing a personal relationship between a prison guard and an inmate, raised numerous questions about ethics, moral compromises, and the dangers of working in the penitentiary system. The courtroom was packed with journalists, and each new piece of evidence sent ripples through society. The prosecution portrayed Sarah as a guard who, succumbing to manipulation, abused her authority to facilitate an escape plan and then committed murder to cover her tracks. The prosecutors detailed how she had disabled surveillance cameras, passed notes to Jason, and accessed confidential information. They argued that her actions were not only emotionally driven, but also carefully calculated, making her a willing accomplice in Jason's escape plan. The key evidence included the notes found in Jason's cell, phone records, and the escape plans. The prosecution used these to show that their relationship was not merely personal, but served a clear purpose: Jason's liberation. They also emphasized that Sarah knowingly concealed the crime to avoid accountability. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to portray Sarah as a victim of Jason's manipulation and psychological pressure. They argued that she had fallen into a trap of emotional dependence, skillfully orchestrated by him. The defense called on colleagues and psychological experts to testify, explaining how the stressful environment of prison work could erode professional boundaries. They aimed to elicit sympathy for Sarah, focusing on her loneliness and vulnerability. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Sarah as irresponsible and dangerous, someone who jeopardized the prison's security. Others viewed her as a victim of difficult circumstances, believing her actions stemmed from prolonged emotional stress. Social media and talk shows buzzed with debates over whether she deserved the maximum punishment or some measure of compassion. On October 12, 2011, the court delivered its verdict. Sarah Holloway was found guilty of second-degree murder, abuse of power, and aiding in an escape plan. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole until serving at least half of her term. The judge emphasized that while her actions were motivated by complex emotions, they still constituted a grave crime that could not be excused. This case became a stark example of how crossing professional boundaries can lead to devastating consequences. It sparked widespread discussions about the need for additional training for prison staff, particularly on how to recognize and resist emotional vulnerabilities and manipulative tactics. After the verdict, Sarah Holloway was transferred to a women's correctional facility where she was to serve the next 25 years of her life. Her world had changed forever. Once a prison guard who upheld order, she was now an inmate, part of the system she once controlled. Life behind bars was harsh and unforgiving, but what weighed on Sarah most were the guilt and the constant memories of that fateful night. Every night, thoughts of Jason Riker haunted her. She couldn't escape the images that replayed in her mind: his gaze, the words that had drawn her trust, and the pivotal moment when everything fell apart. Sarah understood that her actions were the result of emotional dependence and manipulation, but this did little to ease her inner torment. Her thoughts often returned to her children, Matthew and Ariana. They were now growing up without their mother, and this was the heaviest burden for Sarah to bear. She wrote them letters, trying to explain her actions and express her love, but responses were rare. Her son and daughter were growing distant, and the gap between them widened with each passing year. Still, Sarah held on to the hope of one day rebuilding their trust, even knowing the journey would be long and painful. In prison, Sarah sought ways to atone for her mistakes. She began working in the library, helping other inmates gain knowledge and access to books. This gave her a sense of purpose and a chance to use her experience to benefit others. She also participated in rehabilitation programs, sharing her story with other corrections staff to warn them about the dangers of emotional vulnerability in such a high-pressure environment. Public interest in her case persisted for years. Journalists wrote articles, and psychologists and experts used her story as a case study to explore human behavior under extreme stress. For many, Sarah's life became a symbol of the consequences of risky decisions born from emotional loss of control. Sarah Holloway tried to find peace in her new reality. She understood that life behind bars would be long and arduous, but she resolved to dedicate herself to helping others avoid her mistakes. It was her way of accepting responsibility and perhaps one day finding forgiveness, even if only from herself.